Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning into another Supatease video. And in today's video, I'm going to be making a tier list for what I would consider to be the easiest to play melee DPS in World of Warcraft. You could also think of this as what has the lowest skill cap versus what has the highest skill ceiling. And this means what is possible with the specialization versus what is required to succeed in terms of determining whether or not a spec is going to be easy to play or difficult to play. And the purposes of these tier lists, again, are to try and help you make a decision in what you want to play, because maybe you are looking for something that is a little bit more streamlined, simple, doesn't have a super high skill ceiling. You can jump in, have some fun with it. Or perhaps you are looking for a spec that has a really deep pool of options available to it that you want to advance your skills with throughout the expansion. And that's the main purpose of the tier list. It's not to flame any specializations or any play styles or any players who like to play those play styles. It's just to clearly identify where I feel they fit in terms of easy versus hard. So if you go on the S tier for this tier list, it means that you're going to be a pretty easy specialization. You can more or less pick it up and play, and there's not going to be too much involvement in terms of trying to learn what's going on with the game, as opposed to D tier, which means that you're going to have to really take some time with these specializations to figure them out. You're likely not going to have immediate success. And also, just to note, just because a spec is bad, I don't consider that hard. So your spec could be really bad, but also have a low skill cap. So that would still make it an easy spec, just so we're not confused when we go through the tier list here. So Arms Warrior, in Battle for Azeroth and Legion, I would have said that this is an easy melee DPS. I would have been putting it up on A or S, but with the introduction of new honor talents, things like Overwatch, Mass Spell Reflect, Intervene returning, it just has so much utility that the possibilities of the specialization are dramatically increased. So if we're moving from BFA, where I would have probably put Arms Warrior as an A tier, relatively easy spec, I'm putting it now onto C tier, which means you could just try to make it work like you did in Battle for Azeroth, but you are going to have the option to go really deep into the specialization. Why it doesn't go on to D tier is because I think that you can get away with just doing damage, focusing on stuns and cooldowns, but you have the possibility of reaching further into the pool of the toolkit that has been returned to it to really pull off some high skill level plays with the Arms Warrior overall. Now, the Assassination Rogue, this is one that really not a lot is changing. And in my mind, it's still very straightforward. I'd say it's about middle of the road. It's pop cooldowns, do damage, press Vendetta, press Blind. It's very straightforward. Maintain your dots on the target. Pop Feint when you think you're about to be attacked. So there's a little bit of skill elements in terms of its personal defense. But comparatively to the other rogue specializations, I don't consider it to be really that skill intensive, so you are likely to succeed on it more rapidly. If you're interested in playing rogue, I would recommend going for Assassination. I don't think that it's like you just log in and you're immediately successful. And you do need to understand setups, which is why it's not going to be going up onto like the S tier, for example. With debuff management and stuns, it requires a little bit, but I wouldn't say that it is nearly as much as Arms Warrior is now. For Shadowlands, I'm putting it in on the B tier, just middle of the road. You know, there's going to be some things you can do with it. You can sort of just get into it and have some success with it, but you're not going to have the potential of the other specializations in terms of its skill ceiling. Now, Enhancement Shaman, this is a spec that, again, in my mind, it's not performing really well. But at the same time, we're not taking that into consideration for whether or not the specialization is challenging or not to play. This specialization is fragile. So this might sound like I'm saying that it's hard because it's bad. But because it's fragile, your positioning matters a lot. It has very limited mobility. So when you make a decision on to attack or run, it's a commitment, and if you make the wrong decision, you will likely be punished for that. You have Maelstrom management, dot management. Your slows are not powerful, so maintaining them is actually quite challenging. Maintaining your dot is also quite challenging. Timing your burst, because again, you're limited on mobility. Choosing to allocate your Maelstrom to healing versus damage means that you're constantly juggling defense and offense in your mind. So for me, the Enhancement Shaman, you also have crowd control. You need to be worried about being interrupted. You have a very low cooldown interrupt, wind shear, which means there's always something you can be stopping. This enables the specialization to really shine in the hands of a high skill capped player in my mind. Now, just because it's bad isn't the main reason why I'm putting it here on the C tier. It's more or less because of the kit that it has available to it, and the limitations that are on the specialization make it very challenging, but also rewarding if you manage to pull it off. There are some situations that are just frustrating to the point where you might not be able to, but those, I'm not really acknowledging that when I'm talking about Enhancement Shaman. Now, Feral Druid. This is a specialization that, much like the Enhancement Shaman, needs to focus on off-healing, maintaining damage over time effects, retreating, stunning for setups, and that makes it a bit more challenging than the Enhancement Shaman. The Enhancement Shaman's not super worried about trying to set up their team for crowd control. That's the one thing that prevents it from going down onto like the highest skill cap row on the D tier. But for Feral, you do have to maintain spammable crowd control to peel for your team, allocating your resources with predatory swiftness to healing crowd control, and that makes it inherently more challenging. You're going to have more options available to you, which means it's a higher skill cap, which means in my mind, Feral Druid goes onto the D tier for its difficulty in play, maintaining a double stack Ferocious Bite, maintaining your dots, healing while being aware of when you're the target, trying to set up crowd control. You basically have to do everything in the game all of the time. And that might sound intimidating again if you're a player looking for something easy to pick up and just get in there. But if you're somebody who's looking for a challenge where you can expand your play on that specialization throughout the expansion, then this is one that I would definitely recommend for you in this category. Okay, Frost Death Knight. You're probably all thinking, I know where that's going. But Frost Death Knight, to me, you still have to get setups. You need to coordinate your burst damage, and that isn't easy. To know how to do that and how to set that up and make sure that you're maximizing it every time that you do. That's one thing that redeems the Frost Death Knight from going on to the S tier. So I wouldn't say that it's the easiest specialization to just pick up and immediately have success with. You also have Team Utility with Anti-Magic Zone, low cooldown interrupts, slows like Chains of Ice that you need to be trying to maintain on the entire enemy team almost all times to try and maximize your team's ability to avoid crowd control and engage on your enemy target. So there's quite actually a lot of detail to Frost that can be hidden behind like Zug Zug, I hit you hard with big X. That can kind of make you think that it's easy. So it's a little misleading. I would say that it isn't as challenging as Assassination Rogue though, as you can sometimes just rampage with damage to win. So in my mind, Frost Death Knight goes onto the A tier. This is a specialization that I would recommend to somebody if they were new coming back to the game and you were like intimidating, you wanted to play Death Knights. You can get in on Frost Death Knight. You can have some fun with it in random battlegrounds. You can try and learn what the setup, the burst window is. And then once you've got that, you're kind of just good to go as a unit to start pushing for some rating. And it's pretty straightforward from that point. So coming in on the A tier. Now, Fury Warrior. This is another specialization where we can't say it's hard because it's bad. You just can't. You can't say that it's hard because it's bad, and to get higher ratings to succeed is going to be difficult because it's in a bad spot tuning wise. You have to look at the toolkit. In my mind, its toolkit is not. It's not as in depth as arms. In my mind, this is the easiest specialization in the game to play. You will just get in, you self-sustain yourself by doing damage, you just smashing your face on the keyboard, attacking and healing yourself, and your main goal is to just smash your face on the keyboard and attack things and heal yourself. Occasionally press a fear, but most of the time you're letting your teammates do all of the control and strategy, and you're just smashing your face on the keyboard. So for me personally, the Fury Warrior, I would recommend this to anybody that's completely new to World of Warcraft, because it's very straightforward and you're going to be able to heal yourself. It's now, because it's bad, maybe I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, right? But if you're looking for a spec that's easy, then I don't think you can go any simpler than the Fury Warrior right now for Shadowlands. Now, Havoc Demon Hunter, this is another specialization that I'm sure the community is already going, oh, I know that's easy. It wins 2v2 and it's really easy to play. In my mind, Demon Hunter isn't as easy as Fury Warrior, mostly because you have a lot more stuns. You have team utility with Darkness, and you have Imprison for crowd control, and landing Mana Rift, although in my mind, winning with mana burn mechanics isn't necessarily super high skill cap in PvP. You do have to know how to land them, and that's another layer of it. You are also very susceptible to dying in stun, so you need to be very preemptive with your defensive cooldown management. But unlike Frost, where it's like you got to set up all this coordinated burst, it is more or less just smash your face on the keyboard for the damage part, and that is what pulls it down from a high skill ceiling in my mind. I'd say that I'd be putting it around in between Frost Death Knight and Assassination, but more on the side of Frost Death Knight. It's not as easy as the Fury Warrior, but you will be able to jump in and just smash your face if you just want to do some damage in some battlegrounds or something like that. And then you have the option, much like the Frost Death Knight, to learn how your setups work with Imprisoned Mana Rift or stuns, and then learn how to coordinate that over time. But it is simple enough and able to overwhelm targets. It's also another spec that's not in a great position balance-wise. Like, it's not super powerful. I don't think it's awful, but it's not super powerful. But we're not building this tier list off of whether or not a spec is good or bad performance-wise. It's purely based on, can I log onto this spec and just kind of, go, right? Or versus, this is a spec that I'm going to need to spend some time with and learn how to play, and then which option do you want to pick? So in my mind, it's more towards the lower end of the spectrum, or the higher end of the spectrum of this tier list, where you can kind of just log in and go with Demon Hunter. Outlaw Rogue, this is a specialization that, unlike Assassin, I think does rely a lot more on setup and coordination with things like Tricks of the Trade for honor talents to buff up your teammates. It's just a higher level of coordination required than that of the Assassination Rogue. Your mobility is also a little bit more skill intensive, because Shadow Step just immediately teleports you to a target, whereas the grappling hook, you've got to fly through the air, you got to position it, you got to be aware of where everything is on the screen. You're not just making like an at-focus Shadow Step kidney macro. You got to be more aware of the field of battle. You've got Roll the Bones to manage this RNG level of, did I get the right buffs at the right time? Should we attack now? Because of this, it requires more coordination in my mind than Assassination, and you have more options in terms of what you want to do at any given moment than Assassination. So for me, Outlaw Rogue goes in onto the C tier, much like the Armor Warrior and the Enhancement Shaman. And now Retribution Paladin. This is a spec that I've been talking about a lot because I've really been enjoying it, and I need to not lead in with any bias here in terms of whether or not I consider it to be easy or hard in its skill cap. Now, much like Enhancement Shaman, it needs to maintain whether, and Feral Druid needs to maintain whether or not it wants to use its resources to heal or do damage. You have things like Blessing of Sanctuary to be aware of when your healer is in crowd control, and this is towards the higher end of the Ret Paladin skill cap. And then you have things like Avenging Wrath. Do you want to time your burst damage? How are you going to save? Or do you know how to line up all your cooldowns into execution sentence? But the damage rotation part of it is pretty straightforward. You don't really have any dots to worry about. You're just smacking your face on the keyboard, which I think in my mind holds back comparatively to things like Arms Warrior Enhancement and Outlaw in terms of its overall difficulty. For me, I'd say it's about as difficult as an Assassination Rogue. You're going to need to coordinate your burst damage, and then the hybrid element of the spec does increase its difficulty higher than that of a Frost Death Knight or a Havoc Demon Hunter. But it's still, if you wanted to jump in and just play, smash your face, you will be able to do that on Retribution Paladin and have a middle ground, that's why it's in the middle of being able to push your limits on your skill cap with the Retribution Paladin. Now, Subtlety Rogue, some people might think this is a low skill cap because they just stun you and they kill you. I think that's a tuning issue with trinkets at the moment, especially, I'm talking Shadowlands beta, not pre-patch. The PvE trinkets, there's some trinkets that don't share cooldown, and you can press them at the same time with the legendary where you get 100% crit from stealth, and the trinkets kill somebody. Yeah, that's not really super high skill cap, right? But that's also really that's not a Subtlety Rogue. That's abuse of legendary trinket synergy. So I'm not really taking that into account when I'm talking about Subtlety Rogue here. Subtlety Rogue is a spec of just finesse. You're going to need to know how to set up your damage, time your symbols of death, and your shadow blades. You have a ton of layers of cooldowns that you need to decide when you want to line them all up for a big push. It's not just press them all at the same time. You got to be really strategic if you're going to be able to pull off kills, especially in ranked arena. For me, Subtlety Rogue is more challenging than Assassination, definitely, and also more challenging than Outlaw, simply because you're going to have more options more often of the time with Shadow Dance and being able to get 2 2 charges of Shadow Dance means you've got to pick, do I want to Shadow Dance defensively to peel for my team, offensively to set up for my team? You're going to almost always needing to be stunning more than one target, whereas Outlaw and Assassin is focusing only on stunning one target, so you can tunnel vision a little bit more on those specializations. So for me personally, Subtlety Rogue goes down onto the D tier. Your likelihood to succeed with this specialization by just kind of zugzugging your way through is not going to be the same as something like a Frost Death Knight or a Fury Warrior. And you're going to always have this option of play available to you. So this is a spec in my mind that you're probably not immediately going to be successful with it. You're going to need to spend time with it. But if you want something like that so that you can spend time with it and push your limits, then it's going to be a great option for you. That's why it goes on the D tier, highest skill cap. Now, Survival Hunter, very similar to the Subtlety Rogue. The crowd control is pretty straightforward. Stun the healer, land the freezing trap. Right now, managing your pet is really hard. If sometimes borderline impossible, your pet just dies. So being aware of your pet's positioning, maintaining mend pet on your pet to keep it alive is going to be very important. And because it has a pet, it has a higher element of skill cap. You need to know is your pet in crowd control. You've got defensive cooldowns like Roar of Sacrifice to utilize to try and reduce incoming damage on an ally. You have the hybrid element, even though you're a pure, quote unquote pure DPS. I don't even know if that exists anymore in World of Warcraft. Pure DPS class with the Hunter, and Survival Hunter is also very committed in its mobility, harpooning in for freezing trap or disengaging back to the target, and then you're kind of stuck out in the open. It's not a spec I think that you're just gonna smash your face through and be able to pull off kills. It's much like the Subtlety Rogue, gonna require more finesse and more awareness overall to the game. So for me, I would say that Survival Hunter is on the D tier in terms of its potential and its skill cap. And again, this isn't basing it off of whether or not it's bad or good. I just think that if you log on Survival Hunter and you're expecting to win right away and you've never played the game before, probably not going to happen. But if you want to commit your time to it and have something to develop in terms of skill development throughout the expansion, then it is a great pick. It's one of the best picks. That's why it's going on that row. Unholy Death Knight, unlike the Frost Death Knight, has a pet. And we've just been talking about pets a lot with Survival Hunter. Managing the pet, trying to make sure the pet is doing well and surviving is very important. You have the same team utility as the Unholy Death Knight. You need to maintain your dots on multiple targets. You need to allocate your resources a little bit more towards things like Necrotic Strike, or do you want to go for Death Coil? You've got to think a little bit more in terms of your resources than Frost Death Knight. You're not all in on your cooldowns, but your cooldowns are relevant. There's a little bit more of them that you can layer, much like a Subtlety Rogue, things like Abomination or the Unholy Pact. You have a lot of things that you can just pop all together, or you can space them out a little bit and try and catch your opponent off guard. So you have more strategy options as Unholy in my mind than Frost Death Knight specifically. And with the pet having extra crowd control, you need to always be aware of its positioning. Is it in crowd control? Where's the target next to it? You're going to be doing a lot more. I still think that you can be successful with it, just kind of running in and doing some damage. Maybe not. No, I don't think it's as close. Right now, my biggest debate with this spec is whether or not putting it on B tier or C tier. Do I think that Unholy is more challenging than Assassination Rogue or Retribution Paladin? I feel like I do. Again, because of the layered crowd control. Maybe in BFA, when you could heal so much, I would have said otherwise. But with that healing now reduced, you need to kite a lot more. You have the potential to kite. You can support the team. You have more team utility. I think we're putting Unholy, we're putting it on the C tier. I think Unholy is a spec that you'll log in. Okay, we have to think. If you log in and you're immediately successful with it, can you be immediately successful with Unholy? I think because of that, I have to put it on B. I think that you can kind of log on and just focus on damage and be reasonably successful with it. And then the skill cap, but see, the problem with this is that I think it has such a high potential skill cap that you can push the ceiling as high as the C tier, but you're going to be more immediately successful. This is tough. I think we'll leave it in the middle right now on B at the moment for Unholy Death Knight, but just explaining that to you because, again, the purpose of this video is to help you in making your selection. So I think that you will have reasonable success picking it up. but the pet is going to be the skill cap where you're pushing what you can do with the spec. Now, Windwalker, this is a spec that has insanely high mobility, insanely high healing, support for the team, slows, roots, grapple weapons, tons of defensive cooldowns. In a way, you could say that it makes it easy, but it makes it easy in the hands of a player that knows how to use all those tools, right? So you're a spec that can be invulnerable when using the toolkit correctly. But if you're just totally unaware of the toolkit, you've never played a Windwalker monk before, I don't think you're going to be immediately going into like battlegrounds and arenas and smashing people. You're probably going to be falling over and dying through karma and not understanding what's happening. So it definitely has a high-end skill cap in my mind. This is a class that's focused more around its burst damage, so you need to know how to set up burst windows as opposed to some of the easier specializations that can kind of get away with just focusing on damage only. So in my mind, the Windwalker monk is going to be a spec that you want to invest in long term. It's a spec that you want to be looking to play and develop your capabilities of playing the game in general for a long time, not a spec that you're just expecting to log into and immediately have success with, because it requires finesse. It has so many defensive layers. It has the option between defense and offense. Because you have so much mobility at hand, you got to always be thinking about, where am I going next? What am I trying to do? Which is my target? There's always something that you're going to be thinking about. You're always pressing a global cooldown. There's no downtime at all. So for me, I think that Windwalker is a D tier. This means that it's an incredibly high skill cap, unlikely to have immediate success on it. So you will want to consider this as a spec to invest in and get better at over time. And we've got it. And it looks, it looks kind of organized. Look at that. It's like kind of like just the side of a pyramid. We kind of like built a little hierarchy pyramid out of the tier list. Looks pretty cool. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video here. If you did, please leave it with a thumbs up. If you like this type of content, then please do subscribe, as I am doing my best to upload every single day and provide you with what I would consider relevant information towards Shadowlands, so that you can make the right choice in your gameplay and see the success that you want to see. I'm gonna have links to other videos and other tier lists up above here momentarily. But again, if you want to leave any comments down below with your thoughts, what would you consider the easiest specialization or the most challenging specialization in World of Warcraft, then do please leave those comments down below. And otherwise, I will see you in another video.